Tonight, we're going to talk about yet another woman in the Bible and the story of Delilah and Samson. And notice I said it's Delilah and Samson and not Samson and Delilah. Now let's look at the characters here. Just a little background. Delilah was a Philistine woman loyal to her country and her god, Dagon. And she's known for causing the fall of the world's strongest man, which was Samson. All right, now Samson was a Hebrew man, loyal to his country, Israel, and his God, the one God. A giant among men with extraordinary strength and size. Now, a word about this giants. Now, Samson was a real, this story, the two characters, Delilah and Samson, were historically real people. Okay. Now, and the giant, sometimes people just kind of say, well, Samson, it's another Bible story where the impossible happens and whatnot, but not true. Samson was a giant. That's what they were known as, giants back then. And they were men of great height and strength. Samson was, of course, one of these. And we're talking probably 7 or 8 feet tall, and just huge people. Dr. Lamsa has said that he actually knew a family of these giants. Remember he lived in the Kurdistan mountains, and they were still there after centuries. And so in the Near East and in Africa, there are many men who are of great stature and physically strong. They are so powerful that they can wrestle with an ox or buffalo and defeat it. Some of these men can even stop a car. So, and it's also said that most of these giants, wherever in the Near East or wherever, were killed off in World War I. Okay, now, so I put this first scripture, Judges 13:1, in here so that we could get an idea of the background. All right. And this first verse, and the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines for 40 years. Now, before we look at the maps, think about this and look at this, because this is another concept that we talk about a lot, is that in the ancient Near East, God, in this case, it's the Lord, but this is the Lord God. God was considered responsible for both good and bad things that happen. And notice here, it says that the Lord God delivered them into the hands of the Philistines. Well, what happened? The Philistines and Israel were fighting all the time, and you'll see. And so the Philistines defeated the Israelites. And then look what it says. It says, the children of Israel did evil. So God was responsible for both good and bad. And if it was something bad, it was more than likely preceded by evil, or if you're a person, you did something wrong or you sinned. So that's an important concept. But mainly, This story takes place when Israel is in the hands of the Philistines. The Philistines had conquered them at this point in time for 40 years. Now, another interesting thing that comes up is just, and it did just come up, okay? Is I put the map in here so that you could see, they're always fighting over there, even now. And the reason why, and this was the promised land too, but that they were fighting for, but you can see that Israel was landbound from the Mediterranean unless they conquered the Philistines. Okay. And so just thought I would put a map in there so that we could get a picture and an idea of what was going on. And interestingly enough, it does mention Gaza. This is a map of the ancient world. And um and my friend George picked up on the fact that Gaza is in the Bible. And is it the same? Well, yes, it is. All right. So I have this other map here and with showing the Gaza Strip. And you'll notice it's way down here. Same place, same station. Okay. Um, pretty much the same fighting going on nowadays. Okay. The other thing to remember when you're reading this story is that the concept of amplification. And amplification was a literary, it's a literary technique, a literary style, and it is exaggeration used to make an impression, but it's not to deceive. It is the Near Eastern style of writing. And accuracy and preciseness were not important to the ancient Semitic people. Samson and Delilah, we just talked about that, are true historic characters, okay? And Samson's strength as a giant is true, okay? But the story, other elements of the story are exaggerated. So we just need to remember that when we're reading this story. So now we're not going to read the whole story. It's pretty long, but we're going to read enough so that we get the idea of Samson and Delilah, because we're kind of focusing on the women here. Okay, so George is going to read the scripture starting with chapter 13, 3 through 5.
And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, Behold, you are barren and have borne no children, but now you shall conceive and bear a son. Now therefore beware, lest you drink wine or strong drink, and you shall not eat anything unclean. For lo, you have conceived and will bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb. And he will begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. And the woman bore a son and called his name Samson. And the child grew, and the Lord blessed him.
Okay, now you see here highlighted, he will begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Now, we need to remember this as the story progresses and near the end of the story, because it has great significance. Now, the Nazarite vow, okay, it goes back to Numbers 6:2 in Moses' time. And the Lord spoke to Moses saying, speak to the children of Israel and say to them, when a man or woman shall separate himself to vow a vow of a Nazarite, to separate himself to the Lord. Now that word separate, don't get confused. It really just means to separate himself from worldly things. Okay. And to separate worldly things from the Lord. Okay. He shall abstain from wine and strong drink, and shall drink no vinegar or of wine or vinegar of strong drink. Neither shall he drink any juice of grapes or eat grapes or raisins. All the days of his separation, he shall eat nothing that is made of the grapevine, from the skins even to the stones of raisins. All the days of the vow of his separation, there shall no razor come upon his head until the days are fulfilled for which he separated himself to the Lord. He shall be holy and shall let the locks of the hair of his head grow. And this is, of course, where Samson comes in. And Samson has long hair because he is under the Nazarite vow. So all the days of his separation, he's holy unto the Lord. Okay, George.
And Samson went down to Timoth and saw a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. And he came up and told his father and his mother and said, I have seen a woman in Timnath of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me to wife. Then his father and mother said to him, is there not a woman here among the daughters of the kinsmen of your father, or among all of your people, that you are going to take a wife of the uncircumcised Philistines? And Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she pleased me well. But his father and his mother did not know that it was the Lord, that he might seek vengeance against the Philistines, for at that time the Philistines had dominion over Israel.
Okay, now this is the purpose of the vow. That remember we just said that he he was to begin to help Israel defeat the Philistines. Okay. And then this is the way that he was going to do it. He was going to do it through this wife and other women. That's how he was going to do it. So, and I know it says that he might seek vengeance, and we, of course, those of us that follow Jesus' teaching say, "Oh well, vengeance isn't," but here we are again. This was a time of war and whatnot, and so that's what you will see, in the book of Judges. So vengeance was also part of the vow. And it came to pass after this, he loved the woman in the valley of Sorok, whose name was Delilah. And the lords of the Philistines came up to her and said to her, entice him and see wherein his great strength lies, and by what means we may prevail against him, that we may bind him to disgrace him, and we will give you every one of us 1,300 pieces of silver. A couple of things before I go on here. the entire story is revenge against revenge. All right. And Samson had already done some things that made the Philistines very angry. Um, and this is where had to do with where he sent foxes into their fields and destroyed their fields by fire. And also he had defeated many of them. Remember the jawbone of the ass, which we're not going to go into. But so the Philistines were seeking to get him, period. And this is where this is where Delilah becomes the well, there's so many words they use, the betrayer, um, and then she'll become the seductress. So anyway, this is where it all starts with Delilah. And Delilah said to Samson, tell me wherein your great strength lies, and with what you might be bound, and how that you may become weak. And Samson said to her, if they bind me with 7 fresh bowstrings that were never dried, then I shall become weak and be like any other man. Then the lords of the Philistines brought up to her 7 fresh bowstrings that had never been dried, and she bound him with them. Go ahead, George.
Now there were men lying in wait in her inner chamber, and she said to him, the Philistines have come upon you, Samson. And he broke the bowstrings as a thread of tow is broken when it touches the fire. So his strength was not disturbed. And Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have deceived me and told me lies. Now tell me with what might be bound. And he said to her, if they bind me fast with new chains that never were used, then shall I be weak and be like any other man. Delilah took new chains and bound him with them, and said to him, the Philistines have come upon you, Samson. And the men were lying in wait in the inner chamber, and he broke them from off his arms like a thread.
Okay, now just I mean, this is a story, okay? Um,
Hmm.
and Delilah, well, Delilah wants to defeat Samson. She's a Philistine, and she's going to get that money. Okay, so that makes her the deceiver, I guess, or whatever. However, you notice Samson is kind of like playing with her. And I think there may be a little bit of pride here with Samson because he's, breaking these chains and he's becoming very, very confident that the Philistines are not going to defeat him. However, what comes next here is, and Delilah said to Samson, behold, you have deceived me and told me lies. Tell me with what you might be bound. And he said to her, if you weave the 7 locks of my head into a web. And she wove it with the weaver's web and said, the Philistines have come upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and pulled away both the weaver's loom and the web. Now, here comes the great part here. And she said to him, how can you say to me, I love you, when your heart is not with me? For behold, you have deceived me these 3 times, and you have not told me wherein your great strength lies. Okay, this is a very strong woman here, and a kind of weak man. And it came to pass when she had pressed him daily with her words and urged him, his soul was vexed to death. So he was very frustrated. and with her words telling him, probably has some guilt because he said he loved her and all that stuff. Anyway, so here's what happens. Unbelievable. So he told her all his heart and said to her, there was never come a razor upon my head, for I have been a Nazarite to God from my mother's womb. If I be shaven, then my strength will depart from me, and I shall become weak and be like any other man. And when Delilah saw that he had told her all his heart, she sent and called for the lords of the Philistines, saying, come up now, for he has told me all his heart. Then the lords of the Philistines came up to her and brought the money with them. And she made him sleep upon her knees. And she called for the barber and had him shave off the 7 locks of his head. And she began to overpower him, and his strength had departed from him. Um, so at this point, Samson's kind of in a bad place. All right, George, I'm going to let you read the denouement here. Go ahead. Oh, wait, no. Oh, pardon me. But let's talk about this first. The hair. The Hebrews believed that a man's strength was in his hair because they saw that when a man died, his hair continued to grow. And this is why the Hebrew Nazarites did not shave or cut their hair. Now, there's also a little footnote that goes with this, because we even believe that today, but we know that it's not the hair that grows, it's the scalp that recedes and makes the hair look longer. Okay? The hair was symbolic of divine strength, a sacred token and reminder that the Nazarite was dedicated to the Lord. As long as Samson's hands could feel the hair on his head, he felt strong. But when his hair was gone, the vow was broken and his strength departed. Now, it's important. In other words, the strength was not in the hair, but in the faith of his vow and the divine instructions that were given by the angel. So when it says here, okay, and his strength had departed from him, well, yes and no. But let's look at this last scriptures here. Go ahead, George.
And she said to him, the Philistines have come upon you, Samson. And he awoke from his sleep and said, I will go out as the other times before, and I will torment them. And he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. And the Philistines seized him and put out his eyes and bound him with fetters and brought him down to Gaza. And he did grind wheat in the prison house.
All right, now we need to talk about this highlighted part here. And he did not know that the Lord had departed from him. Now, that's kind of a little misnomer there, because the Lord didn't depart from Samson. Okay? God doesn't depart from anybody. God doesn't jump in and jump out of people. God is always there. And God does not change. Okay? And God is present everywhere all the time. But what happened, Samson, when he became mesmerized with Delilah, And anybody could see that if he were not mesmerized or whatever you want to call it, he would never have told her. But um, but he did, and technically, yes, the vow was broken, but it was him. Samson departed from God, and Samson just kind of got caught up in these worldly things like Delilah. Okay, and so and if you think about this, basically he kind of replaced God with Delilah. And we do that. I mean, we do that with people now. We see someone who's really charismatic and saying all this stuff that we really like, and then all of a sudden we focus them, and then our little instructions, our little intuition that we get from God gets turned off and gets ignored. So um, anyway. God did not depart from him. He had departed um, from God. But the hair of his head began to grow again after he was shaven. Then the lords of the Philistines assembled to offer a great sacrifice to Dagon, their God, and to rejoice. For they said, our God has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hand. All right, so far we're the Philistines are winning, okay? And when the people saw him, they praised their God, for they said, our God has delivered into our hands our enemy and the destroyer of our country, who slew many of us. And when it came to pass, when their hearts were merry, they said, call for Samson that he may make sport before us. And they called Samson out of the prison house, and he made sport before them. And they set him between the pillars. Okay, George, you can take it on home.
But I'm sorry. And Samson said to the lad who held him by the hand, let me feel the pillars on which the house stands, that I may lean against them. Now the house was full of men and women, and all the lords of the Philistines were there. And there were upon the roof about 3,000 men and women, looking on while Samson made sport.
Amplification here, guys. Okay.
Then Samson called to the Lord and said, O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee, and strengthen me only this once, O God, that I may be avenged of the Philistines for my two eyes. And Samson took hold of the two middle pillars upon which the house stood, and he leaned against them, grasping one with his right hand and the other with his left. And Samson said, let me die with the Philistines. Then he pulled with all his might, and the house fell upon the lords and upon all the people that were therein. So the dead whom Samson slew at his death were more than those whom he slew during his life. Then his brothers and all the house of his fathers came down and took him and brought him up and buried him between Zeddah and Eshtaol in burying the place of Manoah his father. And he had judged Israel 20 years. He
Okay.
will be sorry.
Let me do this. Okay.
Okay.
Notice I went back to the beginning where I said, remember this, he will begin to deliver Israel out of the hands of the Philistines. That was the vow. Okay.
Right.
And by him doing the pillars and bringing that house down on him, he fulfilled the vow. He died doing it, yes, but that was the fulfillment of the Nazarite vow. And so the other thing to the other thing that I want to mention here is you go back. All right, so Samson had really turned away from God, broken the vow when he told Delilah. He got mesmerized with Delilah when he told her that, and he had really broken the vow. He had turned away from God. I mean, that's what he did. But here's the point, and we said God was there through all of it. Okay, right there.
Mm.
But Samson, he had a choice, and he told her, and that is always assumed to be, bad. He lost his life, and so because of Delilah. But but the point is, you notice that in here, verse 28, he turned back to God and said, okay, remember me, help me, God. And God was right there and said, oh, okay, I've been waiting for you. I've been waiting for you to come back and ask. And so that's another major point of the story. Now, all right. So I just kind of put this here because, all right, and because we're talking about women, we're talking about Delilah. Um, so who seduced who? All right. Delilah, historically, like I say, she's known as the betrayer, the seductress. Um, the she caused the fall of Samson, and it really wasn't a downfall. It wasn't a fall. It was he won against the Philistines, fulfilled his vow. So Samson's way was to defeat the Philistines through women. Okay, because remember we didn't talk about this here, but he had a first wife, and that was another part of the story, and but that was his intent. So so it wasn't this love affair. No. So and Delilah didn't seduce Samson. Samson saw Delilah just like he saw his first wife, and he just fell in love with her, and decided, that was going to be the woman. But once again, we see a woman who was strong, determined, loyal to her country, and she's really kind of put down because of the bribe, the money and whatnot, which, okay, so you want to say that, but Samson became weak, and it had nothing to do with his hair, basically, except that was the belief that as long as he had his hair, then he was, this big and strong. And without it, he wasn't. But that was his weakness. He had a weakness for women. Okay. And no, it all turned out well, even though he got his eyes poked out in the meantime. It turned out okay. I mean, it was part of the plan, I guess, part of God's plan, part of his story. And so like I say, who seduced who? Um, and Samson became weak, just like all these other guys' stories that we've talked about, and he suffered the consequences. That's okay. And so the other thing is the story, of course, was told and transcribed by men. Now, had there been a woman back then, um, who witnessed this story, it might be written in a whole different way. And Delilah may not have been uh, so strongly opposed and whatnot. So, and women were always to blame. I hate to put it that way, but basically, because it was a male-dominated society, the man could be as weak as whatever, but if there was a woman involved, the woman was at fault. And so, as a reminder again, traditional interpretations see Samson's death, as a downfall, like a failure or whatever, when it really wasn't, and it was actually the fulfillment of the vow. And I hope that makes sense. Okay, so this story from over 5,000 years ago, and it continues to reflect the attitudes about women, even in our country today. Even in the New Testament, Paul continues to place women in a subservient role. However, Jesus in the Gospels is clearly an advocate for women, and this is what should be part of Christianity. And of course, we have come a long way in our country with women and whatnot. So some parts of Christianity, do have embraced women and whatnot. But it's just to know the influence for a lot of things in our country today comes from the Bible. This was 5,000 years ago, continued, into the New Testament. Okay, and we do appreciate contributions so that we can keep doing this work and sharing more and better ways of sharing. Okay. And so traditional interpretations, once again, talk about Samson sinning and viewing his untimely death as a downfall. But clearly, this was his destiny. Sure, he suffered, he got his eyes poked out, and he died and all of that. But it was his destiny and the fulfillment of the vow. And if you think about it, if you go and think about Jesus, um, Jesus on the cross, that was his destiny. And no one thought at the time that that would be his destiny, and he wanted to keep on teaching and spreading the words of the kingdom. So anyway, just keep that in mind, and we can have some discussion about that. So thank you for being here.